The hall was silent. A heavy, suffocating silence that contrasted with the exaggerated sparkle of the crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. Her white dress looked more like a war uniform than a wedding gown. Every hand-sewn pearl carried the weight of a decision she would never have made on her own. In her right hand, a bouquet of red roses, perfect for the picture, but with thorns that discreetly scratched her fingers, as if to remind her this was no fairy tale. In her left, a folded envelope, the paper still marked by the pressure of the pen she had used just hours earlier. On top, in bold black letters, the word that had changed the course of her life, contract. The man beside her wasn't a stranger. He was the most talked about heir in the city, the kind of person who could buy anything, except true love. Impeccable in his black suit, every move calculated, eyes fixed straight ahead as if nothing around him mattered. There was no tenderness, not even curiosity in his gaze. Only coldness. The priest spoke, but she didn't hear. The words melted away in her mind like rain on glass. Instead of love vows, all she could hear were the contract's clauses: remain married for a minimum of 2 years. Attend all social events alongside the husband. No romantic involvement with other people. Respect each other's privacy and secrets. On paper, simple. In reality, a luxury prison. The audience, business people, heirs, journalists, watched as if they were seeing a high-end stage play. Some whispered, others took photos. She could feel their eyes on every detail, the way she held the bouquet, her tense posture, her forced smile. A carefully staged show for the press, but empty inside. Across the aisle, in the last row of seats, a mysterious woman watched with a slight smile on her lips. She wore an elegant red dress and didn't hide her interest in the groom. There was something in the way he avoided looking at her that revealed a past, and dangerous, story. The priest's voice cut through the tension. Do you take? The air seemed to freeze. She looked at the man beside her. He didn't smile, didn't reach for her hand, didn't do anything to ease the moment. He just waited, as if he wanted to see how far her courage would go. For a second, she thought about saying no. She imagined dropping the bouquet, running down the aisle, leaving that place and disappearing. But the image of her family's faces, and the debt hanging over them, brought her back to reality. There was no escape. No choice. She took a deep breath, tightened her grip on the contract, and said the word that would change everything: I do. A murmur spread through the hall. The groom didn't react, only nodded briefly, almost impersonally. The contract was sealed. The marriage had begun. And love was not part of the deal. The camera of this scene would now pull back, showing the two of them side by side, surrounded by luxury and appearances, but separated by an invisible abyss. An abyss that, in the coming chapters, would slowly start to fill with secrets, rivalry, danger, and something neither of them had planned: real feelings. Her name was Elena Montero, but few people knew her story beyond what gossip magazines would publish in the coming days about the scandalous contract marriage with the millionaire heir. Amor y Esperanza. Before putting on the white dress and holding that cursed contract, Elena was just an ordinary woman, trying to survive in a world that had never given her anything for free. The oldest daughter in a family marked by financial highs and lows, Elena grew up learning that stability was fragile, almost an illusion. Her father, a visionary businessman, had a talent for deals, but also for making impulsive decisions. One bad bet here, one poorly calculated investment there, and the walls of the house she grew up in slowly began to close in. Her mother, always flawless, believed appearance was everything. Even when debt knocked at their door, she kept hosting formal dinners and wearing expensive clothes, as if the facade could hide the cracks. And, in a way, it worked for others. But for Elena, it was suffocating. At 18, she gave up her dream of studying fashion in Paris to work full-time and help pay the bills. She accepted jobs that had nothing to do with what she loved: store clerk, administrative assistant, personal secretary. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills, or at least part of them. In recent years, things got worse. Her father lost his last investment, and with it, almost everything they had. Debts piled up like waves in a stormy sea. Every call from the bank was a cruel reminder that time was running out. That was when her mother, with cold calculation, began suggesting alternative solutions. And one of them involved marriage. Elena laughed the first time she heard it. Marry for money? It sounded like a cheap soap opera cliché. But as the options vanished, the idea began to seem less absurd, and more inevitable. That's when Daniel Azevedo entered the picture. The heir to one of the largest hotel chains in the country, known for his unreadable expression and disdain for social conventions. A man used to negotiating million-dollar deals, and who, apparently, saw marriage as just another business agreement. The proposal came through an intermediary, a 2-year marriage. Specific clauses, no obligation for intimacy. In return, her family's debts would be cleared, and their future guaranteed. No room for romance, just terms and conditions. Elena wanted to refuse. For days, she wandered around the house trying to find another way out. But every time she looked at her father, defeated, or at her mother, still hosting dinners while avoiding the creditor's gaze, she felt the crushing weight of responsibility. She wasn't just selling her freedom, she was buying time for all of them. On the day the contract was signed, Elena realized that, unlike what she expected, she didn't feel anger. She felt a strange emptiness, like she was watching her own life from the outside. Daniel arrived at the office where the meeting would take place with the same calm as if he were closing a business deal. No smile, no small talk. Just a direct question, "Are you ready to sign?" In that moment, she understood she was stepping into dangerous territory. Not only because she was about to marry a man she didn't truly know, but because with each line of that contract, something inside her was slipping away. And still, she signed. The most ironic part was that, even without taking a single step down the aisle, Elena already knew this deal would not end the way it began. Not because she believed in fairy tales, but because she understood human nature well. Feelings don't follow clauses, and hearts don't obey contracts. What she couldn't predict was just how far this contract would test her, or what she was about to discover about the man who was now, officially, her husband. The contract was already signed. The pens had stopped moving, but the weight of what Elena had done still hung in the air. Until that moment, Daniel Azevedo had only been a name in headlines, a photo on the covers of business magazines, a distant face in quick TV interviews. She knew the rumors, the cold air, the ruthless negotiator, the man who never gets involved. To her, he had been nothing more than a shadow, threatening, but abstract. That all changed the moment he walked into the room. The door opened almost silently, as if even the sound was afraid to interrupt the presence about to fill the space. Daniel stepped inside with steady, controlled movements. His black suit fit perfectly over broad shoulders, the tie knotted with flawless precision. Not a wrinkle was out of place. He looked as though he had walked straight out of a fashion editorial, minus the smile usually expected in a picture. His eyes locked on hers immediately. It wasn't a curious or judging look. It was direct, cold, like someone measuring distance and already planning the next move. A shiver ran down Elena's spine. Not because he was physically threatening, but because something about him gave the feeling that anything could be taken apart and analyzed in seconds, including her. "Miss Montero." His voice was deep, low, and calm, as if carefully rehearsed. "Mr. Azevedo," she replied, keeping her tone formal. Though part of her wanted to ask why he didn't even bother pretending to be polite. He walked closer, pulled out the chair across from her, and sat with the ease of someone who already knew they were in control. A faint, refined woody scent from his cologne seemed to reinforce that aura of authority. Instinctively, Elena straightened her posture. "So, it's you," he said, more to himself than to her, as if confirming information he already had. "I thought you'd be different." She raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" He gave a slight shrug, no smile. "More flexible." The provocation hung in the air like a test. Elena understood the game. He wanted to see how far she'd go to keep her composure. "And I thought you'd be more human," she shot back without changing her tone. A faint glimmer passed through his eyes, almost unnoticeable. It wasn't anger, it was interest. As if she had passed the first test. They stayed in silence for a few seconds that felt like minutes. The faint hum of the air conditioner and the ticking of a wall clock were the only sounds in the room. Elena felt as if every move she made was being recorded, analyzed, and stored in his mind. "I don't like wasting time," Daniel finally said, breaking the silence. "Our deal is simple. We follow the clauses, keep up appearances, and live our lives. No personal involvement, no unnecessary drama." She clasped her hands on the table. "And if one of us breaks a rule?" He looked at her as if the answer was obvious. "Then the other decides the consequences." Something about the way he said it sounded more like a threat than a simple explanation. For the first time, Elena felt that the contract itself might not be the most dangerous part of this arrangement. When the meeting ended, Daniel stood before she did, adjusting his suit with precise movements. As he passed by her, he leaned in slightly and murmured, "I hope you're good at keeping secrets." Then he left, taking with him the scent of his cologne, the tension, and a strange feeling that their meeting hadn't really ended. On the ride home, Elena tried to sort her thoughts. He wasn't just cold, he was calculated, unpredictable, and, in some way, intriguing. There was something about him that stirred both dislike and curiosity. A mystery she knew, against her better judgment, she'd end up trying to solve. What Elena didn't know yet was that their meeting hadn't been as unexpected as it seemed. Daniel already knew more about her than he had shown. And behind the scenes, forces she couldn't see were already moving to turn this contract into a much more dangerous game than she imagined. The previous meeting had only been a taste of what was coming. Elena thought she already knew the proposal when her mother, with a mix of pragmatism and desperation, explained there was a beneficial deal on the table. But she had no idea how calculated, cold, and humiliating that deal really was, until she sat across from Daniel the next day to hear the details. The office where he met her this time wasn't the same as before. This one looked like it belonged in an architecture magazine, glass walls with a view of the city center, minimalist black and gray furniture, and a carpet so soft it muffled every step. In the center stood a massive, spotless desk, and on it rested a black leather folder. Daniel stood by the window, hands in his pockets, eyes lost on the horizon. When Elena walked in, he turned slowly, as if starting a scene he had already rehearsed. "Sit down." The tone left no room for negotiation. She obeyed, keeping her posture straight. The folder in front of her seemed heavier than its size should allow. Daniel approached, opened it with deliberate calm, and pulled out a thick stack of stapled papers. "Here's the contract," he said, as if handing over an instruction manual. "Read it carefully." Elena skimmed the first lines. The title was cold, "Marriage Agreement, Terms and Conditions." No flowery words, nothing romantic, just clauses. He began to explain, point by point, duration, exactly 2 years. Not a day more, not a day less. Public appearance, the couple must attend social events, interviews, and corporate dinners together, keeping the image of a solid relationship. Physical intimacy, not required, but if it happened, it would remain strictly private. Residence, they would live in the same luxury penthouse but have separate bedrooms. No outside involvement, either could have other relationships during the contract. Confidentiality clause, nothing about the agreement could be revealed to third parties, under penalty of a multi-million fine. Elena was already uncomfortable, but Clause 7 made her stop breathing. Image breach, if any of her actions damaged Daniel's or his family's reputation, he could terminate the contract immediately, without paying the debts he had promised to settle. She looked up at him. "This is blackmail." "It's protection," he corrected, calmly. "My protection." Daniel didn't blink. There wasn't the slightest hesitation in his voice, as if he was absolutely certain she would agree to every word written there. "And if I don't sign?" Elena challenged, crossing her arms. He leaned forward, planting his hands on the desk. "Then I suggest you start thinking about how you'll pay the $2 million your family owes the creditors, before they show up at your door." The words hit her like a blow. He knew. Not only did he know about the debts, but he also knew the exact amount. And more than that, he knew she had no other options. Silence stretched between them. Elena stared at the printed words but saw only flashes of her life, her defeated father, her mother clinging to appearances, the house about to be auctioned off. Anger burned inside her, but it was trapped under a thicker layer of fear and helplessness. "You seem to have everything very well calculated," she said bitterly. "That's how I do business," he replied, as if marriage were just another deal. When she finally picked up the pen, Elena felt she was signing not just a contract, but a pact with a man who could easily be her savior, or her executioner. Every stroke of black ink was a reminder that, from that moment on, her life was no longer entirely her own. When she finished, she dropped the pen on the desk and looked at him. "There. Now we're officially a couple, at least on paper." Daniel smiled for the first time since they'd met. It wasn't warm, just a faint curve of his lips, loaded with something she couldn't define. "Welcome to our contract, Mrs. Azevedo. I hope you're a good player." At that moment, Elena understood that this marriage wouldn't just be a facade. It would be a game, and, like any high-stakes game, the first to make a mistake would pay dearly. The contract was signed. The ring on her finger glittered like an uncomfortable reminder that, from that moment on, Elena Montero and Daniel Azevedo were officially husband and wife, at least in the eyes of the world. There had been no wedding party, no music, no vows exchanged. Just a cold registry office signing and a formal photo that would be sent to the press, carefully edited to look like a happy moment. In the picture, Daniel wore a faint, calculated smile, Elena, a calm expression that hid the storm raging inside her. Their private driver took them straight to the penthouse where they would spend the next 2 years. The building was an imposing skyscraper, with a luxurious lobby and uniformed staff who bowed discreetly when they walked in. Everything screamed power and status. Inside, Elena was met with walls of glass and marble. The place was cold, silent, almost impersonal, as if no one truly lived there. The panoramic view of the city stretched out beneath them, but there was no warmth in that home. Daniel made a brief gesture toward the hallway on the left. "Your room is the third door on the right," he said in the tone of someone giving directions to a guest. "Mine is at the end of the hall, on the left." She walked down the corridor, taking in the flawless decor, expensive furniture, minimalist art, muted colors. Her assigned room was perfectly arranged, but lifeless. No photos, no details, nothing that hinted at affection. As she unpacked, Elena realized Daniel hadn't bothered to join her. He was in his office, taking calls and answering emails, as if their marriage had been just another meeting in his schedule. At dinner time, she went to the kitchen. The table was already set for 2. The private chef, who seemed more used to serving corporate banquets than intimate meals, slipped away quietly once they sat down. "So, this is how it's going to be?" Elena broke the silence, looking straight at him. "How what?" He sliced his steak with precision, not lifting his gaze. "2 strangers under the same roof." He chewed slowly before answering. "It's safer this way." His tone was always controlled, as if every word was measured not to reveal more than necessary. Elena felt he had invisible walls in place, blocking any real closeness. After dinner, they went their separate ways. She locked herself in her room, pacing back and forth. The silence in the penthouse was almost deafening. No TV, no hurried footsteps in the hall, only the faint hum of city traffic below. That first night, Elena couldn't sleep. Every shadow cast by the city lights seemed to carry the memory of the contract binding her there. In her mind, the clauses replayed like a cruel mantra: 2 years, public appearances, confidentiality, and no personal involvement. But there was something she couldn't shake, no matter how much she tried to hate Daniel. She caught herself noticing the way he moved, the intense look in his eyes. It was as if, behind that wall of ice, there was something he didn't want to let out. Close to midnight, Elena left her room to get a glass of water. As she passed the hall, she saw a light coming from the office. She peeked through the slightly open door and saw Daniel sitting there, no suit, no tie, sleeves rolled up. He was looking at a picture frame, but as soon as he noticed her, he set it aside and turned back to his computer. "Can't sleep?" he asked, without taking his eyes off the screen. "No," she replied flatly. "Get used to it. This place is quiet." The last word carried a strange weight. As if that silence was part of something bigger. Elena went back to her room, but she couldn't get the image of him with that picture frame out of her head. For a moment, she hadn't seen the cold, calculating businessman, but a man hiding something, maybe an old wound. And deep down, she knew this would be the real game, to find out who the man behind the contract really was. And whether, somehow, he could be more than just a husband on paper. It had been only a few days since the contract was signed, and the calculated silence between Elena and Daniel remained unbroken. No open confrontation, but no closeness either. Each lived in their own bubble, going through the routine like two professionals working on a long-term project, no intimacy, no unnecessary exchanges. But that morning, the forced calm was interrupted by a phone call. Elena was in the kitchen when she heard Daniel's deep voice in the hallway. He was speaking quietly, but there was tension in his tone. Moments later, he walked into the kitchen and placed an envelope on the counter. "Tonight we have an event," he said flatly. "The Azevedo Corporation's annual gala." Her eyebrows rose. "We? I thought the public appearance clause wasn't supposed to kick in this soon." "We're already late," he replied, taking a cup of coffee. "It's the perfect chance to show my marriage is real and solid." Elena took a slow breath. She didn't like being used as a marketing piece, but she knew she was trapped by those rules. That night, a stylist and a makeup artist arrived at the penthouse to prepare her. The chosen dress was an elegant black gown with a subtle neckline and a light train, contrasting with her fair skin. The makeup highlighted her eyes, while the red lipstick gave her an air of confidence. When Daniel saw her ready, his gaze lingered on her a moment longer than it should have. He said nothing, but the way he adjusted his tie seemed to hide something. "You look presentable," he said, almost smiling, before offering his arm. The ballroom was crowded. Golden lights shimmered on champagne glasses, and everyone seemed eager to get close to greet the couple. Cameras followed their every move, and Elena felt as if she were under constant judgment. "Mr. Azevedo, congratulations on your marriage," an executive said cheerfully. Daniel kept Elena's hand firmly locked in his and replied with ease, "Thank you. My wife and I are very happy." The words sounded convincing, but the pressure of his grip sent another message, "Smile. Play the part." And she did smile, not out of obedience, but because she realized this could be a two-sided game. Throughout the event, Daniel remained impeccable. But Elena noticed something. Whenever a guest got a little too close to her, he stepped in, pulling her nearer. Every touch at her waist, every lingering glance, sent an invisible current through her. When it was time for the toast, they stood side by side in the center of the room. Glasses were raised, and, following etiquette, Daniel leaned in to kiss her cheek. But instead of a quick gesture, his lips lingered a second longer. "You're doing well," he murmured near her ear before pulling back with a smile for the cameras. Then music began to play, and the master of ceremonies announced the newlyweds' first dance. Elena froze for a moment, caught off guard. "That wasn't in the contract," she whispered to Daniel. "Consider it a bonus," he replied, holding out his hand. The dance floor cleared. Under every watchful eye, he led her with steady confidence, close enough for her to feel his warmth. At first, Elena tried to keep her expression neutral, but with every synchronized step, she realized something was shifting. Daniel wasn't just a man trained to appear in control, there was something about him that, despite her will, drew her in. When the music ended, the ballroom erupted in applause. Daniel didn't let go of her hand right away, and she didn't pull back. It was a long second, heavy with a silence different from the one in the penthouse, a silence that said more than words. On the ride home, they didn't speak. But when they got out of the car, Daniel did something unexpected. He placed his hand at the small of her back, guiding her toward the elevator. "Tonight, you were perfect," he said, in a lower and more sincere tone than she'd ever heard from him. Elena entered her room with her heart racing. For the first time, she began to think that keeping up a fake marriage might not be so easy, not when sparks were starting to ignite beneath the strict rules of their contract. Life after the corporate event seemed lighter, at least on the surface. Daniel and Elena kept the same calculated distance, but the memory of the dance and his firm hands guiding hers still lingered. However, any illusion of stability was shattered by the arrival of someone Elena wasn't expecting, Melissa Cardoso. Melissa was everything the social columns loved, the only daughter of a billionaire family, flawless looks, a reputation as a business prodigy, and Daniel's ex-girlfriend. Their relationship had ended years ago, but never in a way the media could clearly explain. Rumors of reconciliations and secret dinners popped up every season. That morning, Elena was flipping through some documents in the living room when she heard the sharp sound of the elevator opening. Before she could stand, a tall, blonde, impeccably dressed woman walked in as if she owned the place. "Good morning," Melissa said, with a smile that never reached her eyes. "And you must be the wife." Elena looked at her for a second before replying, "Yes. Elena Montero." "And you are?" "Melissa." She introduced herself like she was handing over a gold business card. "An old friend of Daniel's." The tone dripped with disguised venom. Melissa glanced around, as if inspecting the apartment, then sat on the couch without being invited. "I came to return this." She pulled an expensive men's watch from her bag. "He left it at my penthouse after dinner last night." The words hung in the air like blades. Elena kept her face neutral, but her stomach twisted. Before she could respond, Daniel appeared in the hallway. His expression shifted when he saw Melissa there. "I didn't know you'd be coming," he said coldly. "I thought it would be more personal to deliver it in person," Melissa replied, rising slowly to her feet. The look they exchanged carried history, memories, and something more that Elena couldn't quite read. And even without proof, she knew this woman wasn't there by accident. In the days that followed, Melissa began to show up often for business reasons. Sometimes she called Daniel late at night, other times, she turned up at the same events as Daniel and Elena, always finding a way to monopolize his attention. One night, during a charity cocktail party, Melissa approached Elena while Daniel was talking to investors. "You know he doesn't marry for love, right?" she whispered with a sly smile. "Daniel always does what's convenient. When he's done with you, he'll sign another contract, with another woman." The jab was perfectly aimed. Elena took a deep breath to avoid reacting in front of the cameras. "And you know that talking too much can be inconvenient, right?" she replied, keeping her forced smile in place. But inside, something was shifting. The contract, which once felt like nothing more than a cold obligation, now carried emotional weight. Melissa wasn't just a threat to the public image of the marriage. She was stirring something in Elena that she didn't want to admit, jealousy. Later, at home, Elena confronted Daniel. "Why is she still around?" "Melissa is complicated," he said, exhaling slowly. "But there's nothing between us." "Then why not cut her off?" Her voice rose before she realized it. "Because sometimes, keeping an enemy close is the best way to control them." His answer didn't convince her. That night, Elena realized Melissa wouldn't give up easily. And worse, Daniel seemed to be carrying secrets that could be used against him, and by extension, against her. What Elena didn't yet know was that Melissa didn't just want to ruin the marriage. She wanted something much more dangerous, to expose a truth that could void the contract, destroy Daniel's reputation, and place Elena at the center of a scandal that could ruin her life. After the confrontation with Melissa, Elena spent days with an unease she couldn't quite name. It wasn't just the jealousy or the veiled humiliation Daniel's ex-girlfriend imposed. It was the feeling that something much bigger was being hidden, something Daniel would never tell her, but that she had to uncover before it was too late. The opportunity came on a rainy night. Daniel was out at an external meeting, and Elena, alone in the apartment, was trying to focus on reading a contract. A sound from his office caught her attention, a soft electronic beep, like an email alert. Curious, she stepped inside. The city lights flickered through the window, partially illuminating the mahogany desk. Daniel's laptop was open, without a password, unusual for someone so private. On the screen was a recent exchange of messages with a contact saved only as M.C., Melissa Cardoso's initials. Elena hesitated, but curiosity won. M.C. You know you can't hide it forever. Daniel, I told you to stay out of this. M.C. If she finds out, everything falls apart. Elena's heart pounded. What was this it? And worse, what did Melissa think she wasn't supposed to know? She kept reading and found an email attachment, locked with a password. She tried to open it, but the system demanded a code. Next to the laptop, she noticed a small wall safe, the keypad scratched as if it was used often. Even without access, Elena's curiosity reached its peak. She didn't want to break in, but she already felt she was being deceived. The next morning, while Daniel was getting ready to leave, his phone buzzed on the counter. He stepped out for a moment to answer the door, and Elena saw a new message from Melissa: "The deadline is almost up. Either you tell her, or I will." Cold spread through her veins. For the first time, she felt certain she was caught in something much bigger than a simple marriage of convenience. Determined to act, Elena turned to the only person she still trusted, her childhood friend Clara, a journalist specializing in investigations. They met discreetly at a cafe downtown. "I need you to find out everything you can about Melissa. And about Daniel," Elena said, sliding a napkin across the table with names and dates scribbled on it. Clara raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? Because once I start pulling a thread, there's no stopping it." "That's exactly what I want," Elena replied, her voice heavy. 2 weeks passed before Clara called her back to the same cafe. Her friend's serious face already told Elena that what she was about to hear wouldn't be easy. "Elena. Daniel's past is darker than you think." Clara slid a thick envelope across the table. Inside were old newspaper clippings, financial records, and blurry photos taken from a distance. Among the documents, one headline stood out: "Scandal at Azevedo Corporation, Suspicions of Bribery and Contract Forgery." Daniel's name wasn't mentioned officially, but his father, the company's founder, had been the main suspect. The cases were dismissed for lack of evidence, but according to Clara, that only happened thanks to a multi-million-dollar settlement. And then came the final blow. One of the photos showed Melissa with an older man, whom Clara identified as a former trusted partner of Daniel's father. "They go way back," Clara explained. "Melissa isn't just trying to provoke you. She knows things that could ruin his reputation, and maybe even put him in prison." The world spun around Elena. Suddenly, the contract she'd signed to maintain a public facade felt like a minefield. Melissa wasn't just a romantic rival, she was a calculated threat, ready to use secrets from the past to get what she wanted. That night, when Daniel returned, Elena watched him in silence. He took off his jacket, loosened his tie, and ran a hand over his tired face. For a moment, she considered confronting him right then. But she decided to wait. Because now she had something she hadn't before, the certainty that Daniel was hiding a secret big enough to change everything. And if she wanted to survive this silent war, she'd have to play with the same weapons Melissa was using. After Clara confirmed that Melissa wasn't just an emotional threat, but a key figure in Daniel's dangerous past, Elena knew she could no longer stay passive. If she wanted to survive the contract, and maybe escape it with some dignity, she would have to join the game. But not just any game, a game of manipulation. The first rule Elena set for herself was simple: never show fear. Melissa thrived on the reactions she provoked, and Elena knew any slip would be used against her. So, at the next social event where they crossed paths, Elena walked in with her head high, wearing a vibrant red dress, a calculated choice to contrast with the angelic white Melissa usually wore to symbolize purity. "Amor, amor, Elena, amor, amor." Melissa smiled, her tone dripping with the false sweetness Elena knew all too well. "What a surprise to see you here." "The pleasure's mine," Elena replied, tilting her head with elegance. "After all, it's not every day I meet someone so persistent." Message delivered. Melissa caught the challenge but didn't back down. She simply narrowed her eyes, as if mentally marking a score. Elena's second rule was to control access to Daniel. Until then, Melissa came and went as she pleased, as if she had a free pass. Elena began rearranging his schedule, using social commitments, impromptu meetings, and even short trips as subtle barriers. When Melissa called, Elena was the one to answer, always with the same polite yet cutting phrase. "Daniel's busy. Would you like me to take a message?" Melissa noticed. Within a week, she began sending cryptic gifts to the apartment, boxes of wine, bouquets with unsigned cards, rare books with underlined passages about betrayal and power. Each delivery was a move on the chessboard, and Elena knew she had to respond. That's when her third rule came into play: plant doubt. She began leaving false trails for Melissa, like accidentally overheard conversations about international trips or meetings with foreign investors. All designed to make Melissa believe Daniel was involved in secret dealings that could strengthen him and weaken her leverage. The effect was immediate. Melissa, used to having total control, began to lose her footing. One afternoon, Elena found her in the building lobby, visibly irritated. "Having fun?" Melissa asked bluntly. "Plenty," Elena replied without hesitation. "And you? Keeping up?" The jab hit home. Melissa walked away, but Elena knew the battle was only heating up. Meanwhile, Daniel seemed oblivious to the silent war unfolding around him, or he was pretending. Elena couldn't tell. He maintained his calm posture, but there were glances, moments when it seemed he wanted to say something and then pulled back. It was in this setting that Elena decided to make her riskiest move yet, getting closer to Daniel emotionally. Not as a loving wife, but as an ally. One night, while he was reviewing documents, she sat beside him and said, "I know you're hiding something. You don't have to tell me everything, yet. But you should know, if Melissa thinks she can use me to destroy you, she's underestimating both of us." Daniel stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to read her intentions. Finally, he said, "This is dangerous, Elena." "I'm already in this game, whether you want me to be or not," she answered firmly. "So we might as well play it together." He didn't agree, but he didn't deny it either. That was all the signal she needed. Over the next few weeks, Elena and Daniel began appearing in public as a much more united couple. Photos at events, smiles for the cameras, small public displays of affection, all aimed at undermining the narrative Melissa was trying to spread. At the same time, Elena kept feeding calculated pieces of information to confuse her rival, weaving a labyrinth of half-truths. But deep down, Elena knew this war couldn't last forever. Sooner or later, Melissa would make her final move. And when that happened, the entire game could turn against her, or finally give her the victory. She just didn't realize that that final move would come sooner than she expected, and it would involve something that could put at risk not only the contract, but Daniel's very freedom. Winter came early that year, bringing with it a biting cold that seemed to mirror the tension between Elena, Daniel, and Melissa. After weeks of advances and setbacks in their game of manipulation, Elena could feel the air around her growing heavy, like the stillness before a storm. The warning came on a Thursday morning. Daniel had left early for a meeting, and Elena was having coffee in the kitchen when the intercom buzzed. The doorman's voice sounded oddly tense. "Mrs. Elena, a package has arrived for Mr. Daniel. It's urgent, but strange." She went down to the lobby and found a black box with no sender. When she opened it, her heart raced. Inside was a flash drive, a bouquet of wilted roses, and a handwritten note. "You wanted to play power games. Now you'll watch his world fall apart." She knew exactly who had sent it. Melissa had decided to play her final card. The choice was clear: tell Daniel right away or try to see what was on the drive herself. Against her better judgment, Elena plugged it into the laptop and opened the only folder available. Inside were dozens of files, bank statements, photos of secret meetings, forged contracts, and even recordings of incriminating conversations. All of it pointed to a major corruption scheme involving the company, and indirectly, Daniel. But there was something worse. Among the files was a video from years ago, showing Daniel in a heated argument with an older man, the same former business partner Clara had identified. The sound was muffled, but one final sentence came through clearly: "If this comes out, we're all finished." Melissa wasn't bluffing. If this went to the press, there would be no way out. At that moment, Daniel walked into the apartment. When he saw the laptop screen, his face turned pale. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice low but tense. "Melissa sent it. She's ready to destroy you." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if carrying the weight of years on his shoulders. Then, he did something Elena didn't expect. He sat beside her and told her everything. Daniel revealed that, early in his career, his father had forced him to sign documents that covered up illegal transactions. He had never profited from them, but his signature was there, enough to implicate him if the case was reopened. Melissa had discovered this years later and used it as leverage to keep control over him. "The contract we signed," Daniel said, meeting her eyes, "wasn't just to protect my public image. It was to protect you from getting caught up in this mess. I knew that if Melissa wanted to hit me, she'd go through you first." Elena felt a mix of anger and compassion. It all made sense now, but it also meant they were trapped. That's when she made the boldest decision of her life. "Then let's turn the game around." Together, they spent the night building a plan. They would use Melissa's greed against her. Daniel drafted a fake share transfer agreement, supposedly selling part of the company to a foreign investor. The document, full of complex clauses, hinted that he was planning a massive escape and leaving Melissa out. The next morning, Elena played her part perfectly. She arranged a chance meeting with Melissa, making sure the contract was visible inside her half-open bag. As expected, Melissa couldn't resist. She secretly photographed it. What she didn't know was that the contract contained a legal trap. Any attempt to use it as evidence would count as a crime, invasion of privacy, and manipulation of corporate information, something that could put her at the center of a federal investigation. 2 days later, the news came: Melissa had tried to sell the information to a tabloid. Before she could, she was intercepted by lawyers and investigators Daniel had already alerted. The threat was neutralized, but the war had taken its toll. One quiet night, after everything was settled, Daniel and Elena sat on the balcony, looking out at the city. "Does our contract still stand?" she asked in a whisper. Daniel looked at her, more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. "Only if you want it to. Because now, I don't need it to stay by your side." Elena smiled, but didn't answer right away. Maybe love had never been part of the original deal, but somehow, it had found a way in, and, like all real feelings, it didn't need a contract to exist. That night's cold didn't feel so sharp anymore.
Hey, did you like this story? Then hit subscribe to Between Lies and Love so you won't miss the next chapters. Don't forget to like this video. It really helps us bring you more emotional, anime-style K-drama stories. And I want to know, what was your favorite part of this story? What do you think we could do better in the next episodes? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and your idea might even show up in the next video. So subscribe, like, comment, and join this family that loves drama, twists, and unforgettable stories.